Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's Tuesday Techniques with me, Jackie Blakemore of So Much More Fun. It's been a little while, had a break over the Christmas period to give you a bit of a chance to enjoy the festivities, but I'm back today to talk to you about continuing our mission to get a better fit with some of your sewing patterns. And so today I want to go through how to make some basic shoulder adjustments on your patterns, how to work out what your shoulder looks like and how that fits, and then make the changes on the patterns that will help you get a really nice fit around the shoulder area. So just in case there's anybody able to join me live, I'll just run through some basic housekeeping. So the idea of the Tuesday Techniques is that we cover some hints and tips about using dressmaking patterns so that you can try a few different styles and get them to fit your body, and you can work out how to make small adjustments in many cases, but just those nice tweaks that make it fit you and your body shape and your posture really well. The sessions are usually around 30 to 45 minutes. If you're able to join live, then fantastic. Please ask questions and I'll try and answer those as we go along. And then if you are not able to join live, then I can record the sessions and they appear on my website, which is somuchmorefun.co.uk, and also on the Facebook page and in the Facebook group. So ask questions there as well if you have any queries from watching these videos, or there's particular pattern queries that you have. I'd be more than happy to answer those for you. And so just let me know what's on your mind and what you're struggling with. Excuse me. So also, I'd really like to know, once you've watched this, if you watch it in the replay, then let me know what you got from it and whether you've been able to use the adjustments and how you're getting on with using your sewing patterns. And it'd be really great to see what you're making and how you're doing that. And I'm trying to share some of my makes in the Facebook group and on the website with some pattern reviews and different things. And so you'll be able to see the kind of adjustments that I make on the patterns that I'm using. So let's get into it. So today we're going to be talking about basic shoulder adjustments. And then next week I'm going to be looking at the kind of bust adjustments, so for small or full bust adjustments. So if you're able to join next Tuesday at 12:30, then that's the topic that we're going to be covering then. So for today then, so why are shoulder adjustments so important? Well, a lot of the garment kind of hangs, if you're wearing a shirt or a dress or something like that, then it predominantly sits from the shoulders. And what we want to do is make sure that when it's positioned on your shoulders, it's going to hang nicely and it's going to allow the grain to fall in the direction of gravity. So it's going to hang well on your body. It's not going to skew, it's not going to keep twisting when you're wearing it, and also you're going to get a nice fit around the sort of shoulder and sleeve area. If you get the shoulders wrong, or if they don't fit you very well, then this can influence the bodice, it can influence how it sits around the neckline, it can also influence how well the sleeve fits, and how the armhole feels when you're moving your arm and restricting the movement. And it also, people kind of see that, so we tend to focus in the profile area here, and then the fit across here sort of catches your eye line when you're looking at that. So you want to get this area quite nicely fitted so that you complement your features. That's what we all want. We want to look great. And so by making a few small adjustments, then we can improve how the garment looks and how it fits when we're wearing it. We also, from the side profile, want to make sure that, I don't know whether you can see, this isn't a great example, but it's a good example of how not to do it. So I have a slightly forward shoulder, but we also want the seam line to look as if it's running kind of in a straight line as you're standing in profile. And that, again, just draws the eye. So when people are looking at you when you're in your clothes, you want that nice straight line from your neckline out towards your shoulder point. So that you don't want them to be sitting forwards or backwards, because that will draw the eye and it will draw attention to anything that is kind of off in your posture, or any particular things like that. So the kind of things that we can change about the shoulder fitting are the slope of the shoulder. So we're going to look at how you can check what your shoulder slope is. The length or the width of your shoulder, so the distance from your neckline up to your shoulder point. And then the position, like we said, this kind of front and back nature. So whether your shoulder whether it sits back, or whether you, a bit like me, you're a bit round shouldered, and your kind of shoulder sits forward. And so they're all things that we can adjust on the pattern to make it fit better for you around the shoulder area. Okay, so how do we measure? Well, the first thing that we can do is we can measure the shoulder length. So I'm just going to show you how you would do that on yourself. So I'm wearing a necklace today. This is another necklace by the lovely Juicy Glass. So if you haven't visited her Etsy site, then go and do that. I highly recommend it. Beautiful jewellery. But it can be helpful to wear a necklace just to see where the neck point is. So your neck point is kind of below where your earlobe is, kind of straight down from there, really. That's where your neck joins your shoulder. And that's kind of quite a key point when we're taking measurements for the shoulder. And so if you put a necklace on and it's just hanging, then usually where your necklace sits on that line, that's the base of your neck. And that's the neck point that we want to take to measure the shoulder. The true shoulder length. Now, your tops don't all have to sit here. It's not like my tops are all kind of going to sit around this neckline. It's just it tells us what your kind of true shoulder length is. Okay, so when we measure, we're going to measure from the neck point. So you can hopefully see that. So I'm going to put my tape measure sort of where my necklace is. And then I'm going to measure out for the length of my shoulder to my shoulder point. Now, I'm not going to measure sort of off the end. So as you're looking at my shoulder here, I'm not kind of measuring off to the end here. I actually want the point where my arm starts to move around. So the kind of where the body stays still, but where the arm starts moving, where that starts. And when you lift your arm up, you'll feel that there is kind of you should feel a bit of a dint that you get sort of where the joint is there. And that's the point that we want to measure to, because that's where you want your seam to sit. You can see mine's a bit longer actually than my shoulder point in this top. So you're going to measure from the base of your neck, and you're going to measure out to where that sort of dint is there. And so on me, that's about 5 inches. So I'm going to say 5 inches. Again, if you can get someone to help you and have a look, then that's also really helpful. So mine's 5 inches. And so you can make a note of that somewhere in your journal or your sewing book or whatever it is that you want to keep your measurements. And so that's going to give you the length from your neck point. And we'll talk about kind of how we're going to use that later on. The other thing that you want to have a look at is the slope of your shoulder. And the average, if there is such a thing, is that your shoulder point sits 2 inches below your neck point. So if you imagine a straight line kind of coming across your neck point, like that kind of Frankenstein bolt going across here, and imagine a straight line going out here, then the distance between the edge of that straight line and the edge of your shoulder on an average person is 2 inches. So I was trying to think about how you could check that on your own. Now you can take a photo and you can try and have a look from there. And the degree, I think, when I was reading up about it, the degree here should be about 20 degrees. Okay, at this angle here should be 20 degrees. But I thought there's quite an easy way that you can check that. So what I did was I took a piece of paper and I measured my 5 inches out. And then because the drop's supposed to be 20 inches, 2 inches, what I did was I took a piece of paper that was the length of my shoulder. So that's kind of my 5 inches. And then I drew a point from there that was 2 inches down. And then I just folded from that point up to the top point. And that is, that's kind of 20 degrees. And so you can use that then, that slope against your shoulder. And if what you want to be doing is holding it so that this edge line here is vertical, as vertical as you can get it. So you want to kind of get that, move that around till it's vertical, and then hold that against your shoulder slope. Now you can see, hopefully on mine, if I move a bit closer to the camera, that actually my shoulder is a bit more slopey than this piece of paper. If I'm holding that, it's not too bad, but my actual shoulder sits a bit lower than 2 inches. So from the imaginary line down to my shoulder is just over 2 inches, which means I've got a bit of a sloping shoulder. And And that's probably true from bad posture and sitting at the computer for too long. So and that can come as well. So mine was also kind of like a forward shoulder, and as your shoulders come forward, they also tend to come forward and down. And so you'll often find if you've got a bit of a forward shoulder, then you will have probably a slightly bigger slope than the average. If your slope is less, so if I kind of sit with perhaps a better posture, then you'll see if I do the same thing, then my shoulder is higher than the edge of the paper, and therefore my shoulders are more square, if that's the case. So depending on how when you look in the mirror, it's really hard to do this in kind of reverse order, but if you sit and your shoulders are a bit more square and kind of up and level, then you'll have more square shoulders, and you'd make a different adjustment for that. If your shoulders are a bit like mine and a bit more slopey, then again, and the degree of slope will vary, from person to person. There's no right or wrong. There are averages, more people having certain measurements than others, but it's just your body shape, and it's great just to know what that is. So have a little play, have a look in the mirror, take a bit of paper, do your measurements, have a little check, and just get some idea of your own body. I think that's the best way to start making adjustments, is to really look at yourself and try and understand your own body proportions and your body shape. Okay, so you can measure the length, and you can measure the slope, and you can use that either by kind of looking in the mirror, or you can use this little trick that I've just shown you with a bit of paper, and that all helps to just to understand what adjustments you might want to make as you're looking at your garments. Now, you can also try and detect from putting a garment on what adjustments you might want to make. But be aware, like I said earlier, not all patterns, if you're measuring the length of the shoulder, for example, on a pattern piece, not all patterns come up to the neck point. So if it's not the kind of pattern that does have like a kind of a close fitting neckline, then you're better to make a toile and try the pattern on, and then pin fit the pattern, based on the length from trying it on, because it'll be hard to tell. You haven't really got a kind of base point or a starting point to go from to do your measurements. Okay, so what to look for then? So when you're trying your toile on and you've made your first version of whatever pattern it is that you want to make, then there are things that you can look for when you're wearing it to determine how your shoulder size and position compares to the pattern. So if you have a more sloping shoulder, then if you imagine if the pattern's been designed with a particular slope in mind, if your shoulder slopes away a bit further, it's going to fit you at the neck point, and the weight of the garment's going to kind of rest at the neck point, but there's going to be probably a bit too much fabric at the outside edge, so at the armhole. And the way that's going to show up is that you will start to see wrinkles forming diagonally from the neckline to the armhole. So you'll kind of see it sort of wrinkling a bit like I'm sort of showing here. So you'll see that sort of wrinkling. In fact, it's probably the other way, more like that. Yeah. So if your shoulder's more slopey, then you'll end up with excess fabric kind of sitting here, and this will be trying to pop up, and you'll have a lot more fabric and drag lines showing on the garment here. So if you have a sloping shoulder, then you could use shoulder pads to balance that out. So you could try and find a shoulder pad that matches the difference. In the old, obviously in the 80s, that was much more popular, less popular now. But the other option is to make an adjustment. And so in a moment, I'm going to show you how to make adjustments for sloping and square shoulders. So if you are the opposite and you have a more square shoulder, then if you imagine in that situation, the majority of the weight of the garment is going to sit on the outside edge of the fabric, and you're going to end up with kind of a bit loose and a bit of excess fabric, and it trying to pop up and pull forward around the neckline, because it's going to be sitting too high kind of on your shoulder. And so that's going to give you wrinkles that form kind of across the shoulder area, because you're going to have excess fabric here. It's going to be around the neck, and the garment feels like it's kind of creeping up and kind of moving up your neckline when you don't really want it to be doing that. So again, if the garment has shoulder pads, or if the pattern is designed for shoulder pads, then you could take those out and you wouldn't need to use them, or you could use a smaller shoulder pad, or you can again make the adjustments that we're going to have a look at now. So I've created a couple of examples, and what I would recommend is if you've got a pattern like a PDF pattern, you can actually print it with 2 sheets per page rather than a single sheet per page, and it will come out about 3/4 size from the original pattern. It means you can have a play with it, so you can still assemble it, and then you can have a play with some of these things that we're going to have a look at today, rather than doing everything full size. But again, if you also have a pattern that you're working on and you're thinking, does it fit me, and can I use these adjustments, then you can start to have a look at making these changes as we go along. Okay, so I'm just going to change my camera so I can show you the overhead. Okay, so for this I've got 2 kind of pattern pieces. I've got the top part of 2 bodice pieces. This is the back piece and this is the front piece. And you can see here I've got the shoulder seam, the kind of shoulder showing here, and then the shoulder point here, and we've got the neckline on this one and the armhole, and then the neckline and the armhole on the front piece. Okay, so to make if we want to make the shoulder less if we want to increase the slope of the shoulder, then that's probably one of the easier adjustments to make. I'm going to show you on this front piece to start with. So let's say we determine, so when you've pinned it, you determine that you need to take out maybe kind of about 1/4 of an inch from here. Then what you can do is just measure down from the end of the shoulder seam and mark that amount that the seam needs to be lowered. So if I take my my pencil here and I can just measure down 1/2 inch, so 1/4 of an inch here, and then I can draw a new line in from there. Now I would tend to mark my seam allowance first, and then make the adjustment based on where the stitch line would be, and then redraw my seam allowance in. So if I just draw that there, and then I measure back out my 5/8 or whatever. So on here it's about 3/4, and then just make sure that's level and just increase my seam allowance there. So you probably will end up with the same amount here, but this is probably the most accurate way of doing it, because it's actually where you're going to sew rather than at the edge of the actual garment. But then what you would also need to do is make the same adjustment. If you just change the shoulder position here, then you're going to be reducing the size of the armhole. So you'd also want to make a corresponding adjustment to sort of drop the sleeve, the armhole point here. Now this is a bit of a funny shaped pattern actually, and so it's going to look a bit odd, but I'm just going to drop that by my 1/4 of an inch, and then I would redraw my curve excuse me, to incorporate that 1/4 of an inch. Now I have some you could freehand it, but I also have some kind of French curves, and you can use these to help you when you're redrawing your curve. So I would actually want it to go from here. Oops, that's my new cutting line, and I want it to, let's just see if I can get a good curve here. Not matching it very well, just I'm going to freehand it. So just at this bottom point here, I'm just going to need to add in that extra so that I retain the length of the armhole. Okay, and then you could make that adjustment on your pattern. Now if you've done it on the front, you would also need to do it on the back, so you would repeat that same change on the back. So if I was going to do my again, if I was going to bring it down by 1/4 of an inch, the outside, let's do that. And again, you can do it from your stitch line as well. That should be the same. But again, I've not left myself a lot of room here, but you would also then do that at the armhole on this part of the pattern too. Excuse me, just going to see if I can grab a better curve. Bigger. And again, you would just redraw the curve in, adding that extra to the armhole. And what that will mean is that if you've got a sleeve pattern for this particular garment, then the sleeve will still fit because you've not changed the curve of the armhole. And this is the quickest way to do the minor adjustment. So if the amount of change that you need is less than, let me just check my notes, is less than or equal to 1/2 inch, then that will allow you to, you can use this method. If you need to make more than 1/2 inch adjustment, then it's probably more accurate to move the whole armhole section. And so I'm just going to show you how to do that. So what you would do in that case, I'm going to show you on the front piece. What you would do in that instance is that you really want to just move the whole kind of armhole down so that you don't lose any of the shaping. Excuse me. So you're going to draw a line from the midpoint of the shoulder. So, and it wants to be parallel to the grain line. Excuse me. So, so you're going to make sure, oops, so I'm going to line mine up on my cutting mat here actually, and that'll make it a bit easier for me. And I can just choose a line on here to link it up with. Okay, so I'm making sure that this is halfway through, and I'm just going to draw that line in. And then you draw across from there. So you draw a horizontal line about 2 inches below the armhole. So I'm scaled down, and I don't really want to interfere with my dart on this pattern too much. So, and I'm not going to do a huge adjustment. I just want to show you the principle. So I'm just going to, I'm going to draw my line here at right angles. Okay, and then what you're going to do is you will cut out this section. So I'm just going to cut this all out completely. Take that out. And then effectively you're going to shift that whole section down by however much it is that you need to reduce the shoulder by. And so let's say that was, I don't know, let's say that was 1/2 inch for the purposes of this. Into the bottom of my pencil. So I can draw another straight line here at right angles. So it is going to interfere. I will sort that out in a moment. And then I would stick my piece back on here. Now you can see that I'm going to have to make some adjustments to tidy this up at the top and the bottom. So I'll just show you that in a second. So I'm just going to stick a little piece of tape on there. So what this has done is at the top, you'll see now I've got a chance of a much greater slope. And so what I would be doing is with my piece of paper here, let's cut a piece of paper. So now what you would do is you would just stick that onto there. For a second. And then you would redraw in the best line for your shoulder. So you'd now draw a new line, which will take some off one part and add some on the other. So that was going to give you your reduced shoulder point. And then the same at the side seam. So you would just neaten up. So again, if I've got my pattern here, what I would be doing is looking to draw a line in here to just bring this point back out for the dart in this case. And that will give you your new side seam. Okay, and then the same is true in reverse. If you want to, if you have a more square shoulder and you need to move it up, then you do the opposite. So you would, if I just take that off for a second, instead of bringing this piece down, you could then move this piece up. Stick that on there. By the same, by whatever amount it is that you need. So in this case, you'd need to insert a piece of paper. So we can do that. Just take that down for a second. You would work out how far up you wanted it to go. So let's again say it was 1/2 inch. You wanted to add 1/2 inch. Draw your line in and then stick your piece back on. You could draw your new side seam in. So put my ruler up. So you could draw your side seam. So you're going to lose a bit off the original, but you're going to be, actually it's not too bad, you're going to be adding a piece on. And then again on this top part here, you're going to make this more square. So that's going to be kind of like more like that. And again, you would repeat that same change on the front and the back, and then you just want to make sure that the side seams still match up and that the shoulder, you still get a nice line at the shoulder. So it's really important when you make a change like this on the pattern that you then true up your pattern. So on the original, you can see if I put the two seam lines together, we've got a really nice curve around the neckline. We've got quite a nice curve around the armhole. So after you've made your change, if I was to just put this one, if I just fold that where the seam allowance is. So imagine I'd made the change. I'd again be doing the same test, but we've now got this kind of like little jaggedy angle here. So I might be inclined just to kind of smooth that off. So you get a nice smooth line, a nice smooth transition across the shoulder. So when you put your sleeve in, that will just fit really nicely. Okay, so we just call that truing up, and that's just making sure that your pattern is going to go together nicely when you've made your adjustments. Excuse me. Okay, so I can see there's a couple of you on. I'm not sure if you've got any questions, but by all means, just say hello. Let me know that you're here, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you've got any at the moment. Oh, that's certainly seen somebody off. Okay, so I just wanted to come back now and just talk to you about, so that's the kind of first basic adjustment, and it doesn't have to be massive. It can make a difference. Just a few, like 1/8 of an inch or 2/16 can make quite a difference to how it's fitting and just how well it sits. So have a go. It's quite straightforward. Have a play around with it and try it on some of the toiles and things that you're making, and just see what a difference it makes, for you. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to look at is the narrow shoulders. So let's say, for example, you have a smaller frame than the pattern was designed for, and so you're shorter from here to here than how the pattern was designed. That's no problem. Equally, you might be longer, so you might have broader shoulders than the pattern was designed for. Excuse me. So the next two adjustments that we're going to look at are to compensate for the length of the shoulder. So if the shoulder is too long, then the way that you will know that is that the kind of shoulder seam drops off the end of your kind of over the top of your arm. The upper sleeve then will kind of wrinkle, so you'll get sort of wrinkles in this area here, because you've kind of got, if I sort of artificially create it, you've got too much fabric here, so this will wrinkle. And then you'll also see this more wrinkles here in the bodice, so you'll kind of see a lot of excess, what seems like excess fabric here, and that usually just means that you can kind of see the difference, can't you? I'm sort of pulling my shoulder in a little bit, but this is wanting to kind of drop down, and I've got excess fabric here, and I seem like I've got loads of extra here, which I don't really need. Whereas when I sit, when I put my shoulder properly into my top, then it fits nicely, and I've got a nice fit kind of around the edge of the armhole, and also into the sleeve. And and oddly, if it's too long, it can make the sleeve feel restrictive, in that instead of the armhole, you really want the armhole to be as close to your arm joint as possible, because that's going to give you the biggest freedom of movement. The further out that is, it kind of moves the whole garment as you're moving your arm. So you really, you kind of trying to get a balance all the time between comfort and then fit in this area so that you can get movement. And if this is too far out, then it can feel like it's restricting you, because you feel like the whole garment's going with you whenever you're moving your arm. So so that you might notice that if you kind of sense that, then it's worth having a check to see where the shoulder position is coming up on your body. Again, you can do a minor adjustment, which you can take up to about 1 inch off with a minor adjustment, which I'm going to show you, or 1/2 inch if you're kind of under a size 16. If you're quite small, then you probably don't want to take more than 1/2 inch off the length just with this minor adjustment. And you can do the major adjustment up to about 1.5 inches. If you're doing more than that, then I would suggest you have a look at the pattern size that you're using, because it could be that you've perhaps chosen too big a pattern size and there's a different adjustment that you need. So sometimes when we're making garments, and you'll know this from ready to wear, if you've got a big bust, for example, then you might have to buy a bigger size to give you the room across the bust. And what that will do is make the shoulder too big, because the size that you've bought is not really the right for your frame, it's the right for your bust. And so that means that sometimes you can end up with it being too big on the shoulders. And the same is true here. If you pick a pattern size to suit your bust rather than your cup size, if that makes sense. So if the pattern doesn't accommodate larger cup sizes, then you might find that when you make it, it feels like a really massive adjustment on the shoulders. And I would say you probably then want to go back down a few sizes and look at doing a full bust adjustment, which is what we're going to cover next time. So yeah, sometimes it's a combination of choosing the right size and then picking the right adjustment. So as a guide, again, like I say, for larger sizes up to 1 inch, 1.5 inches, probably is the maximum adjustment, and on smaller sizes maybe only up to 1 inch. If you're making more than that adjustment, then I'd look at kind of, you know, where else it's not fitting. And again, for broad shoulders, what to look for. So if it's too tight and it's kind of pulling in, you can see now, if I make this so that it's too short in the shoulder, it starts to pull the sleeve out of alignment, because it can't hang down, because it's the fabric's being used up to go over past where it should be on the shoulder. So you get this sort of sticky out, or you get kind of drag lines here. And then it will also again feel, the sleeve will feel too tight rather than the armhole feeling restricted. It will feel like the sleeve's too tight, because actually you're using too much of the sleeve fabric to go over the shoulder to compensate for the fact that the shoulder is too short. And for that, again, you can extend the length of the shoulder, and you can add up to kind of around 1 inch, again, equal distance of what you could take off. You could add up to about 1 inch. But again, if you are trying to add more than that, then again, I would look at the size of the pattern that you're using and maybe choose a different size, maybe get up a size, and then make changes for a smaller bust if that's the issue in the rest of the pattern. Okay, so we're just going to have a quick look at that. So we've just got a few minutes left with this session. So I've got another pattern here that I can show you that on. I'll just get myself ready. Okay, so let me just swap the camera over for you. So you can see. Okay, so in this instance, what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at the length of the shoulder. So I've got this pattern's quite small in the shoulder, so probably not the best example, but quite good if you want to lengthen the shoulder. So for this one, we're really talking about this distance here. So whereas before we were talking about this angle, now we're looking at the actual length going from here to here. And so for this modification, when you're going to want to lengthen the shoulder or shorten the shoulder, you're predominantly going to be doing it at the armhole edge in this case. If you you could make the adjustment here, but what this is going to do is actually just change the position of the neckline. It's not really going to change the position of the shoulder point. So you're usually going to be doing it at the armhole edge. In the simplest form, what you can do is, just use this pencil. For the small adjustments, you can just take a measurement here and just change your shoulder point here and redraw in your new shoulder line. And again, you'd want to do the same on the front and the back pieces. So we talked about truing these up. If I just move this down so you can see. So again, if I was doing this on, I'd kind of fold out my seam allowance so I can get the best idea of where I want to make the adjustment. And I want to retain this really nice flow. So if I put those on top of one another, if I'm going to take my sort of 1/4 of an inch off here, then I want to do the same, but I want to try and sort of blend from one into the other like that. So you kind of get the idea of just drawing that in. Hopefully you can see that pencil mark on there. So if I'm going to shorten it, then that's how I would go about it. And like we said, up to probably 1/2 inch to an inch. I've not got a lot of room on this one, so I'm not going to make a big adjustment, but you can make that change here. Now, if you've got a sleeve, then really you shouldn't need to adjust the sleeve too much, because what this will do is hopefully move the sleeve into the sleeve head into the right position for you. So it should bring it, to the right point. But we are going to be looking at sleeve adjustments for later on. So in the series. So again, the opposite of that is that you might want to do a small adjustment to add length, sorry. And again, you would do the opposite. So if I've got my 2 pattern pieces, I would be marking where I wanted the extra. So let's say I wanted that here. And then I would stick this down and I would cut out my new line. And again, you're trying to blend it to nothing, because you're only really wanting to adjust the kind of shoulder point. You're not necessarily wanting to bring any of this in. You don't want to lose room around the arm curve. So you just want to blend it in with as little impact as you can, really. That's the idea. So if you have a broader shoulder and you want to kind of make that adjustment, then like we said, you would stick this down and you would draw out your point. If you want to do, you might want to also add in you might also need to change the kind of the line then of where you're drawing your cutting line to. Sorry, I'm just checking my notes and it just threw me for a second. Okay, now if you've got a bigger adjustment to make, so that's fine up to probably about 1/2 inch, I would say. If you want to do a bigger adjustment, then again, you're going to do something similar to what we did with the larger adjustment for the shoulder slope. And the idea of that is you're just going to draw once more your line across. So you're going to come down halfway from your shoulder point, and you're going to do that at right angles to your in line with your grain line. So I'm just going to give myself a line I can work to, so I can make sure I do that by eye. Let's do it this way. So I'm just using these see-through rulers are great because you can get a good line. So I'm just going to draw that in, and then I'm going to draw at right angles to that. Again, you'd go probably maximum about 2 inches down, depending on how big you need to make your adjustment. So if I draw my line here, and once again, you're just going to cut out this little section. And this is where you're going to have to make a bigger adjustment. So you need to kind of add a lot of length or take a lot of length out. Oops. I'm just going to cut this little section out. Now, if you remember when we were talking about it, if you want to add length, it's usually because it's going to be also going to be a little bit tight across the sort of front of your chest at the very top. So this is going to give you a bit of extra width there as well. So you're going to use your cut line to give you your sort of your reference point to line it up with. And I'll just try and move this over a little bit. And so you would stick this one down on the bit of paper, and then you would say how much you need to lengthen your shoulder by. And so let's say I'm going to do 1/2 inch. It's not very much in this case, but that would equate to probably 3/4 of an inch when we were doing it full size. So if I draw that in, and then I would stick my new pattern piece back on. I'll stick that on there for a second. And again, you can see that you would have to make an adjustment at the top. So then you would just redraw in your new shoulder line to get that. So you'd end up taking a little bit off one piece and adding a little bit on the other to fill the gap. And then you would need to redraw your side line as well. So in this instance, you're just going to use your curve or whatever it is to redraw that. In fact, yeah, I might have done that a little bit wrong in this example. Because you can just, you would, let me just redo that, sorry. I can show you properly. So we actually want to do it halfway down the armhole. I've just realised my mistake. And it's actually this piece that we would bring out on its own. And then reline that up. And then you would redraw the armhole in from there. So that's going to make this armhole a little bit of a different shape. This curve. So yeah, so it's about trying to get your sorry, that's not right. I'm not having a good time of it today. So you want to go halfway between the two. Sorry, that's what I meant to be drawing. So this is the line here. So you want to go halfway between the original position and the end. So you sort of want to take off half of one and add half on the other. So not this one. My bad. Okay, so you would move this section out. So just to recap, sorry, you would draw your line kind of about halfway down from your into your armhole, and then you would cut across here, and you would shift the this top section out or in, depending on whether you want to lengthen or shorten your shoulder, and then you would redraw your armhole curve in kind of crossing over halfway between the two. So that will then retain the original length of the armhole, like that. Okay, so if you've got any questions, then just let me know. Sorry, that last one was a bit more confusing. But if you've got any questions on that, then I'm more than happy to answer those. Let me just come back to you. Okay, and so that's it for today's session. So that gives you a couple of different shoulder adjustments. So one to the slope of the shoulder and then one to the length of the shoulder. And if you will try and cover next time as part of the bust adjustment, if you've got a forward shoulder, then what you would want to do is just change the length of the shoulder pieces. And so I'll try and drop just a recorded video into the group for that, which is a bit more detailed on how to make the adjustment to just move the seam so that it sits, instead of running back over your shoulder, it kind of sits to the end point of your shoulder here. So I'll do a little video on that, so keep your eyes peeled. But yeah, so that's it for today. I hope you found that useful, and I look forward to seeing you all again next week. And let me know your comments, let me know what you got from it, and we'll be talking about full bust adjustments. So if you've got any questions on that or experience of doing that, then please get in touch and let me know, and then I'll try and cover those in the video itself. All right, thanks very much. Have a great rest of the day. Bye for now.